research I didn't have any primary research myself. I used a variety of primary sources and journal articles to kind of create a narrative where I looked at the fears that adolescent males experience, which are associated with trying to constantly perform masculinity and defining it as a form of oppression. So starting our exploration, we're looking at the implications that come from that performance of gender normal behavior through both the successful and unsuccessful attempts to constantly put up that construct. So moving on, what is depression? We're defining it. This is one definition, sense of being weighed down in body or mind. Oppression is broad in scope. There are many different forms of oppression, and often outside influences can lead to one internalizing oppression when they begin to believe that they belong, if people belong in the oppressive position that others are placing them in. So for our focus, we're looking at the experience of adolescent males in American society, and what I found is often the oppression is peer inflicted. So there's a lot of peer policing that comes with trying to maintain this constant construct. So in the daily lives of American adolescent males, there's this constant struggle to maintain masculine gender behavior, which leads to that persistent fear of not executing, which is the oppressive environment on a constant basis. Moving on, Michael Kimmel wrote a book called Garland, and one of the chapters is about high school. And there were a few points from this book that really stuck out to me. He labeled it as a period of high confusion. Males feel socially hindered from finding comfort by expressing how confused they are. They're confused, but they're afraid to confide in their peers for fear of appearing vulnerable. And so they end up masking all of their insecurities in a bravado, a macho strut. And one quote that really stuck out to me, Michael says, "The hormonal changes that boys experience during puberty are bewildering enough, and high school adds a new overlay of expectations about proving masculinity, deciphering a pecking order that seems to have its own internal and impenetrable logic, and navigating the relentless domination of jock culture." So certainly there are a lot of hormones that come into play during that time in life anyway. On top of that, there's confusion of how am I supposed to act and how do I stand out from the crowd and look like the man that I'm working toward being. So moving on, there was a journal article which resulted from some research in 2009. And the article, "I'm Not Going to Be a Girl, Masculinity and Emotion in Boys' Friendships and Peer Groups." It looked at 23 boys who were students at a preparatory high school in the northeastern United States, and it asked them a series of questions about their friendships and their experience with their peers. And a few points that came from this: boys avoided emotional displays. They mocked those who showed any sensitivity, labeling them as weak gay early. They feared showing any vulnerability. Thinking back to the previous slide, vulnerability comes up again, due to disparaging responses from their peers. And they often perceived that there was really no middle ground. You were either tough or weak, masculine or gay. So there is a video, it's narrated by Jackson Katz, where he talks about this idea as well. And he begins by discussing the kinds of labels and concepts that boys typically associated with what a guy is. So we will begin with one part of this video.
Boys and young men learn early on that being a so-called real man means you have to take on this tough guys. In other words, you have to show the world only certain parts of yourself that the dominant culture has defined as manly. You can find out what those qualities are if you just listen to young men themselves.
A real man is physical.
Strong. Independent.
It's powerful. Physical.
Intimidating.
Strong.
Independent.
In control. Rugged.
Scares people.
Powerful.
Respected.
Hard.
A stud.
Athletic. He's muscular.
A real man is tough.
Tough. Tough.
So So you see some of these definitions that these adolescent males find to be the proper labels for masculinity. So certainly looking at that, we want to look at what they perceive to be not living up to this image. And we talk to these same boys and ask them to give some of those labels.
They called a pussy a bitch.
You fag, queer,
Soft.
you're a little mama's boy. Emotional, girly, is a wimp.
Bitch. Queer. You get called weak.
Wuss.
Sissy.
Fag,
A fag.
fag. You're a fag.
Pretty startling. So remembering back to the study, the 2009 study on the boys at the preparatory school, we remember that a lot of them perceived that there was really no middle ground. You're either tough or weak, masculine or gay. So my question for you, do you feel that sense of being weighed down in mind yet? Moving on, a book that I used for my research really found that masculinity is often defined by what it is not, which is feminine. One quote, the general prejudice against being gay is so strong that it affects many social interactions among men. Boys are constantly avoiding trying to even look weak because they don't want to be perceived as gay. Guys who have a deep friendship and intimate connection run the risk of being seen as gay, which creates a problem for male bonding and homosociality, which is basically a friendship between the same sex. And by being aggressive and not displaying feelings, men can assert their claim to masculinity. Friendships between boys provide them with autonomy and status, but not social support, empathy, or nurturance, which another part of this section of the book often was attributed to the kind of features that are found in females. So looking ahead to this idea, the results are that there's a hypervigilance in not appearing too friendly with other males, a sense that being perceived as gay is synonymous with being less of a man. And referring back to that 2009 study, they were asked how they might react to seeing other boys console each other, comforting each other, and sharing their feelings. They'd start rumors that they were a couple, they'd call them fags, and the results of this is boys really should not be compelled to show concern for the feelings of others because, in their view, that's behavior only meant for girls. So what about racial differences? I looked at a couple of research articles that specifically focused on different races. There was a 2004 study that looked at gay and gender non-conforming black male students. They often preferred to be teased as a source of attention. They took abuse, sometimes it even became physical violence because it allowed for interaction from their peers, which shows that marginalization from their peers was often felt as being more painful than the taunting that they were receiving. Another study looked at masculine achievement and found that achievement among racially and ethnically diverse males and their psychological health may be undermined by adherence to these certain gender-typed behaviors. Of course, more study is warranted to understand the similarities and differences among the races. I'm actually pursuing that kind of research myself right now. So the pain of social exclusion is experienced in a very similar way as physical pain. There was a study that pointed to the fact that social pain is a specific emotional reaction to the perception that one is being excluded from desired relationships or being devalued by desired relationship partners or groups. The emotional pain is analogous to physical pain, and pain creates an unpleasant memory, a kind of conditioning, which is a motivation to avoid the unaccepted behavior. So how do we experience pain? Neurological research has shown that the pain of social exclusion and physical pain actually fire up the same part of the brain's pain detection system. So you're being excluded from a group or somebody's hitting you with a stick, your brain is perceiving it as the same. So looking back at conditioning, just as physical pain conditions any organism, including humans, to avoid the pain causing stimuli, exclusion from social groups elicits a similar response. I'm sure you're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow once observed that people are motivated to satisfy the needs at each level of the hierarchy before moving up to the next level. Safety and security must be established before you can address those higher needs. Experiencing pain hinders the sense of safety. And without a strong sense of security, it is difficult to find success in addressing those higher needs, such as love, esteem, and, of course, self-actualization. So moving forward, what are the implications of this? Adhering to expectations often resulted in lower achievement because concern for grades was often perceived as not being masculine. Lower self-esteem because adhering to those masculine behaviors meant that you didn't have the opportunity to open up about your feelings and express yourself. So what about failing to adhere? Often leads to a risk of depression and or suicidal behavior. Often people self-medicate with drugs or alcohol, and there's a risk of depressive behavior. There's also a 2001 Surgeon General's report on youth violence that found that social rejection was the most significant risk factor for adolescent violence, which is stronger than gang membership, poverty, or even drug use. So the unfortunate thing is, a lot of these boys know that it could be better. Referring back to the 2009 study I referenced, I'm Not Going to Be a Girl, these subjects expressed that they did feel relief in times when they could have openly expressed themselves, whether or not it was a one-on-one counseling session, or even among their peers, but in a counseling setting. So they're among their peers, they're with a counselor, they're opening up about it, but these very same peers just out in the classroom or out in the hallway or out with their friends, they didn't feel that same ability to open up, and they didn't find that ability to experience relief. They often recognize the positive personal consequences of sharing their feelings, but as one boy noted, there was a fear of negative reaction from their peers, which prevented them from disclosing their fears and feelings. This is one quote from one of the participants of the study, who observed that he totally thinks it's good to talk about your fears and worries, but he observes that it doesn't happen a lot because there's the whole macho thing that prevents him from being able to find that therapeutic effect, and in the end, it just ends up hurting even more because he can't talk about what he feels. So some of the conclusions that are reached with this is that there's that sense of being weighed down in body, where the pain of social exclusion is being experienced just as physical pain is. That sense of being weighed down in mind, boys are constantly fearing being labeled negatively, fearing ostracism if they don't perform masculinity on a constant basis. And it creates an environment where they can never really publicly let their guard down. So some of the solutions that I see from this are that adults could model behavior that show that emotion is a healthy part of human interaction. There could be provided better conflict mediation strategies which highlight empathy as an appropriate way to respond to conflict. And we're looking back at how some of those boys labeled what masculinity and being a man is, and strength was really one of those. So strength isn't just about physical strength, but strength is also about strength of character. And to equate that to masculinity, I think, would be a real good way of making that connection to a lot of adolescents who are living in this kind of oppressive environment. So that's what I had. As I mentioned, I'm pursuing some first-hand research where I'm going to be speaking to participants at Holyoke High School. The high school is roughly 50% Latino, so I'm going to be using that as kind of a way of filling in some of the missing pieces to the similarities and differences among how different races experience masculinity. Thank you.
Questions? A lot of the research that you
my research, in fact, it was observed back in the 90s that there wasn't a great deal of focus on this. And I'm actually really fascinated and excited because just since when I did my research for a class last fall, I've seen so much focus on this. So I really feel like our society is shifting in a way that makes it more acceptable to speak about this in a real, candid, and sincere way. So I feel positive on it because I feel like it is going the right direction. Any other questions?
I have a question. So it's interesting that you specifically at adolescents. Do you think that much of this relationship is unique to adolescents? Do you think that it exists to look at kind of the younger pre-adolescent version of masculinity? Is there also a question likewise in young adults and as we age? Does this go away? Is it unique to adolescents?
Well, what I found is it really starts to show itself in the middle school ages, but certainly it doesn't go away. In fact, I have kind of an anecdotal idea. So I wait tables, and about a week and a half ago, I observed a table. I was delivering the food, and I had a prime rib in one hand, club sandwich in the other, and I was delivering it to right through hearing their conversation, knew them to be, husband and his wife. And so I set down the prime rib, and she took that, and then he said that he had a club sandwich. And this is his wife. And she says, yeah, he got the sissy sandwich. This is his wife. And so certainly it's not going away. And I think that perhaps the younger generation is becoming a little more comfortable with friendships, speaking about feelings on a broader level, but it's perhaps one of those things that needs to kind of progress now as people get older and just understand the world a little more.
I feel like there's a similar parallel to older generations being more likely to express racism. Right? And I think that can be true with this. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. It's been an excellent session, and I'm sorry to say